A business doesn't want to make a loss, what does it want to make?
A doctor who can sell prescribed medicines.
A list of events placed in time order is usually described as what?
A manufacturing process releases poisonous gases. What is the most important safety measure for workers at this plant, ensuring good ventilation, or appropriate footwear?
A specialist who repairs leaking water pipes is called?
Animals with white ivory and long trunk.
From where can you have a full view of a building, the outside, inside or top?
How many days added in February during a leap year?
How many days are in a leap year?
How many days in a week?
How many sides are there in a bilateral agreement?
How would you call people who study ancient bones, rocks and plants?
If a button has come off a shirt, what would someone most likely use to put it back on?
If something such as fabric or medicine is artificially made, what do we say it is?
If telescopes are used to locate distant objects, what instrument is employed to magnify minuscule objects?
If you have a toothache, who would you go to?
In a recession, does economic activity increase or slow down?
In the animal kingdom, is the purpose of camouflage to attract a mate, to find food or to hide?
On what geographical location would someone be living if their country is surrounded by water on all sides?
Some calendars begin the week on Sunday. What is the other day which commonly starts a week?
The instructions that tell you how to cook food? What do ophthalmologists specialize in?
What do we call the alphabetical list, at the end of the book that tells you where to find specific information?
What do we call the organ in our chest that we need to breathe?
What do you call a list in front of a book which outlines the structure of a book?
What do you use to test the body temperature?
What does a sundial measure?
What kind of movement of the sun can be seen during dawn?
What instrument would you use to examine very small life forms?
What is it called when two or more people are speaking to each other? What is 1/2 of 100%? What is the antonym of vertical?
What is the economic sector that deals with farming?
What kind of food that vegetarians do not eat?
What is the job title for someone who looks after your teeth and gums?
What is the meeting point of the sea and the sky?
What is the name of the field of study that studies the human mind and behaviors?
What is the name of the instrument used to measure variations in temperature?
What is the opposite of positive?
What is the opposite to predecessor?
What is the name for the small piece of paper you receive after paying for something in a store?
What are the things that you touch with your left hand when you play a guitar?
What is the shape in geometry that has 3 sides?
What key mineral makes seawater different from fresh water?
What is the word for book that someone writes in order to tell the story of their own life?
What kind of protector does a motorbike rider wear to protect his head?
What material is the tire made of?
What identification document does most people need to carry when they travel between countries?
What do you call a period of 10 years?
What do we call it when the moon completely blocks out the light from the sun?
What's the place of areas where a college or a university is located?
Where can people go to borrow books?
Where would you expect to find equipment like microscopes, bounce and burner, beaker and petri dish?
Where would you go to see an exhibition of artworks?
Which one is quicker, running, walking, or jogging?
Which sweet food do bees produce?
Who is a person that makes bread, cakes and pastries?
Who would you consult to treat a fear of crowded places, a philosopher or a psychologist?
What natural resource is used by a carpenter? How many hemispheres does the equator split the Earth into?
Which shape in mathematics has the concept of perimeter and diameter?
If you invented something, what can you apply for to prevent others copying your invention?
Which literacy genre describes all details of a famous person's life?
What shape has 4 sides of the same length?
What do we call the frozen water?
How often is an annual conference held in 1 year?
Before airplanes were invented, how did people travel from America to Europe?
How do you describe the line that segment a circle?
If a couple have a boy and a girl, how many children do they have?
In the word postgraduate, what does post mean?
Some magazines are published once a year, and some are published twice a year. How do you describe the type of magazine that is published 4 times a year? What can bring astronauts to space?
What do guitars and violins have in common?
What do humans and animals need to inhale for survival?
What is a thermometer used to measure?
What is the opposite to convex?
When something has increased by triple, how many times does it increase?
Which one is easier to recycle? Plastic or paper?
Who sits in the cockpit of an airplane?
On a computer, what is Times New Roman an example of?
Which field of study uses the periodic table?
A new lecture is arriving later this week on Wednesday. If today is Tuesday, when will they arrive? Today, tomorrow or next week?
What is the name of the title of the main article in a newspaper, often in large letters and bold print?
How many sides does a pentagon have?
What do we call a specialist medical doctor who performs operations?
What is the name for the remains of an animal or plant preserved in rock?
In what a collection of photographs assembled?
If a person's blood alcohol content exceeds the law's maximum, which everyday activity is he or she prohibited from undertaking?
In what kind of habitat are camels naturally found?
What is the opposite of stale?
What do you call someone who speaks 2 languages?
A sabbatical is a lengthy time away from what type of activity? What do we call the 2 holes in the nose, which we breathe through?
In statistics, what kind of figure shows a circle divided into different segments? To find a detailed topographical map of Africa, what kind of reference book would be best to use?
How many years are there in a decade?
What is the first paragraph of an essay?
What is the force created by the process of vigorously rubbing 2 things together?
What do we call a mountain which could erupt?
On which continent are the languages Korean, Thai, and Hindi widely spoken?
What reference book is specifically for synonyms and antonyms?
What is the name of the mathematical process that is the opposite of division?
Which part of the human face is used for smelling and breathing?
What is the verb used to describe something which slowly loses color due to bright sunlight?
How many wheels are on a bicycle?
What is the name of a ship which can travel under the water?
What is a doctor for animals called?
What is the term for two siblings who were born from one mother at the same time?
What is the word for the joint in the middle of your leg, which allows your leg to bend?
What is the place you share bedroom with your classmates? What is the largest lake in the world?
What is the top surface inside the room?
What do you call your cousin's father?
What do we call drawings or writing on a wall, especially in a public place?
What do we call the lenses which people use instead of glasses?
What is the barrier that can prevent floods from damaging our home?
What includes everything in the world such as stars and planets?
What does the word TV stand for?
Who flies an airplane? What do we call a person who leaves college before finishing the studies?
What is BA for, such as history and literature?
What do we call a short piece of writing containing the main ideas in a document?
What do we call a horse-like animal with a single horn on the head?
What is the room in which you keep things when you don't need them?
What do we call a set of answers to exercises or problems?
What is the verb that describes traveling on boat?
What do we call a person who pays rent to the landlord?
What do we call a person who is hurt in a criminal case?
What do we call someone who studies languages?
What do we call a dream that is very frightening or unpleasant?
What do we call a car that needs to be charged?
What is the couple's formal relationship called?
What do we call the selling and transporting of goods to another country?
Where are goods stored before sale?
In sport, what do we call the cloths that we wear and end above the knee?
What do we call a child who will soon be a teenager?
What is the study of religion called?
What do people usually use to cut food?
What do you call a statue or a building that is dedicated in memory of someone?
What is the term used to describe a period of 7 days?
What is the opposite direction of sunrise?
What do we use to launch a space shuttle?
What do we call the treatment in which people use needles to ease others' pain?
If someone tells something funny to you, what is your reaction?
What is the act of reusing waste materials?
Which part of our body does a gastroscope look into?
What do you call a word formed from the first letters of other words?
What do you call the people who work on boats?
What does subterranean mean?
What do you call the persons who study religions?
What do we call the subject that studies weather and temperature?
What device do you use to measure your weight?
What is the nominal form of the wide?
When trains or cars need to go through a mountain, where do they enter the mountain?
Where is a criminal kept as punishment?
What do we call a person's move to a more important job or rank in a company?
Which one in the 4 seasons has the lowest temperature?
What does sub-Mediterranean refer to? Whose job is making and repairing wooden objects and structures?
What do we call famous people?
What is the highest position in the embassy?
What device is used to measure the height of mountains?
What thing do postgraduate students have that undergraduate students don't?
What do people hold overhead when it is raining?
How do you call someone with no hair?
What is the act of jumping into the water?
What do we call the pen that receives its ink from its reservoir?
Apart from coffee and hot chocolate, what beverages also contain caffeine?
What is the musical instrument which has both pedals and strings?
Where can we find the page numbers of books?
How do you call the movements that the babies move by using hands and legs?
What force makes humans stay on the Earth?
What do we call the person who plays musical instruments as a job?
Where do people go to watch plays?
How many years are there in a bicentennial?
Tomorrow's lecture has been cancelled. If today is Tuesday, then on which day is the lecture cancelled?
In the solar system, which heavenly body produces sunshine?
What do we call the legal document that states how people's property should be allocated after their deaths?
What do you call the government where the power is concentrated in the hands of one person?
What is the room that is under the ground floor?
Where do people go for watching sports or games?
What material are windows made of? What is the music that is recorded for a movie or a film?
What do we call the northernmost and southernmost parts of the Earth?
If you want to read tragedies or comedies, what kind of book do you read?
What is the hardest part of your hand?
What is the opposite of artificial?
Which one is more widespread, Korean, Thai or Hindi?
In mathematics and arithmetic, there are addition, multiplication, division. What's the other one?
How do you describe the money that citizens must contribute to the government for public use?
Which color do we make by blending black and white?
What will snow become after it melts?
Oral English is different from academic English. Which is the best term to describe academic English? Tolerant or rigorous? Who is the Swiss greatest scientist in physics?
What kind of drugs are used for killing bacteria?
What do we call the extra performance that actors give?
What are the strings on shoes?
Which part of our bodies do we use nasal spray in?
What is the name of the student who has not completed his course?
A dozen is a grouping of which number?
What material is used for most of vehicles and craft?
In the library, which books we are not allowed to bring them out with ourselves?
Which one is past tense? Has gone, went or going?
What is the ceremony called for marriage?
How do we call the car that uses two types of fuels?
What do we call a machine which carries people from one floor to another in a high building?
What do you need to submit for completing a degree in the university?
Where do passengers stand waiting for a train in the railway station?
If a building is 1,000 meters high, from where do we measure the height?
What is the joint called where your hand is connected to your arm?
How do you call a student that has finished his first year?
What do we call the line between a sunset and the sea?
Which day of the week starts with th?
What is the name of ceremony in which two people get married?
What's the color of the medal that a champion gets?
What do you call the brother of your father or mother?
What do you call the medicine that is used against headache?
Which item of cutlery has several prongs, usually 3?
How many years does a millennium have?
What is a word or expression that has the same or nearly the same meaning as another in the same language?
What is the occupation that transfers one language to another language?
What clothing do people wear, such as students or nurses, to show that they belong to the same organizations?
What object do we open a window or a door by?
How many years are there in a half of a decade? If you do something every day, you do daily what?
What category do the bee, the butterfly, and the mosquito fall into?
What do birds use to fly? What do you call a person who lives next to your house?
What do we call buying and transporting goods from another country?
What does the color green help for?
What do we call a person who trains a team in a particular sport?
What do we say if we call brothers and sisters in the same way?
What type of body covering helps to insulate burns?
What is the generic term for a person who once had the same title as you have now?
What is the colorful sticker that is attached to an envelope?
Which continent is Canada located in?
Where is a suspect convicted of a crime?
What is the straight line between the center of a circle and any point on its outer edge?
What do we call a statement presented in court by a defendant or a lawyer?
What do we call the behavior of not buying products from an exact company as a way of protesting?
What do we call a collection of large quantity?
What are breakfast, lunch, and dinner examples of?
What is the opposite of negative?
What is the general term for painting at countryside or natural view?
Which is the season of the year when plants start growing again? What do you use to dry your body after a shower?
The sense of hearing will allow you to hear. Then what sense will allow you to see?
What do we call a liquid that is used for washing hair?
The natural coloring or form of an animal which enables it to blend in with its surroundings.
Would a supermarket, a cafe or a bookstore probably have the widest range of products available?
What do we call dollars, cents, pounds and euros?
What is the thing used for sun protection in summer?
What do we call people who work on ship or plane?
How do you call the device that produces electricity?
How many quarters are there in a calendar year?
What do we call a person who writes a book?
How many sides does an octagon have?
How many years are there in a century?
We call a person used to using the right hand a right-hander. And what do we call a person if the left hand?
What do we call 3 children born at the same time to the same mother?
What do you call a picture or design permanently on your skin made with a needle and ink?
What do we call people who help others get insurance?
What is the storyline or the series of scenes of novels, movies, short stories or plays?
What is the process of choosing a person for a position by voting?
What do we call one of 4 equal parts of something?
What is the process of breaking down plastic and glass and using it again?
How many days are there in 1 year?
What revolves around the Earth?
What do we write on blackboards with?
What do we call the type of energy that uses uranium to generate electricity?
What do we call a person who writes and checks financial reports?
What subject studies the science of animal behavior?
What do we call the thing that covers a bride's face?
What do we call a man who is getting married? What's the gray thing in the sky when it's about to rain?
What do we call the long, orange thing that grows underground?
Ears are for hearing. What are eyes for?
What do we call the party in power?
What do we call the phenomenon that a volcano throws out lava, ash and steam?